All right, the gang is all here. We're back recording another video for you here. And we're in early 2025. So it always happens this time of year. I think it's fun and a good exercise to look back on what happened in 2024. It's especially fun to look at the predictions and the year-end price targets for the S&P 500 that came out at the end of 23. So it was people's predictions about what was going to happen in the market in 2024. I think both 23 and 24 went against the consensus. It went very much against the consensus, and the people that come out with these forecasts they don't really make too wild of predictions. They like to stay around the historical returns, maybe plus or minus 5 to 8%. Most fall within that range. So just to walk through a couple of the known price targets for 2024, we're getting this info this is from FactSet. So JP Morgan's year-end price target for 2024 was 4,200. Morgan Stanley's was 4,500. Wells Fargo's was 4,625.
They got very specific. I don't know if Wells Fargo had some inside information or something, but they had a very specific number.
They're dialed in there. UBS was 4,700, Bank of America 5,000, Citigroup 5,100, Deutsche Bank 5,100, Goldman Sachs 5,100. So it's really close.
Yeah, there was a point in time in November where the S&P was trading over 6,000.
Yeah, we finished up the year at 58.81, or up 25%. So these are some of the most well-known names in our industry. What are your guys' thoughts on this, and how useful are these predictions? I feel like a lot of them have just come out for 2025. How useful is this stuff?
It's stuff that it's almost it's performative, I think. Like we know that the information isn't that useful. Strategists have to do it because we all want to hear it, and it just goes round and round. So like we ask them for this information, so they give it to us, and if they give us something that's based on historical averages, it's funny when you look at the average return that the markets give it over time, because if you look at the actual number of years that have been close or relatively close to the average, it's not that. It's a positive skew. So you look at a bell curve and there's more years on the right side because the market is usually up. It's usually up a little more than the average because the above average years get weighed out by the handful of years where the market's down a bunch, like 2022. You know what I mean? And I think that choosing the average acknowledges that you're not capable of making a more specific, better prediction, but it's almost certain to be wrong. And I think that's what everybody should expect based on what we've seen over time.
Yeah, to wit, there were several names on this list at the end of 21 in projecting where the S&P 500 would end 2022 at, that had fives, a 5,000 number on the S&P 500. The S&P went down almost 20% in 2022. It was down, I think, 18%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Brandon, to your point, I think it was Ryan Dietrich who put out the stats dating back to 1950. I believe it was 5 times that the S&P had finished the year within plus or minus 2% of the long-term average. So just 5 times in almost 75 years.
These firms are not going to stick their necks out and take a risk. They're just not going to do that. And so they're all going to fall in that same, like you said, case, up 5, 6, 8%.
If we're forcing them to do this exercise that we all know is futile, then I think that it's more responsible for them to not take a risk. Because if people are going to see this information, I would rather them just base it on a few percentage points around the long-term averages than say some insane thing and just hope that they're right. People that do that are just broken clocks. And every once in a while, somebody nails it and they're super bullish or bearish and they happen to get it right. And that's great for them. But that's not a responsible thing to do if people are paying attention to you. I'd prefer them to do the averages, even though we expect that's probably going to be wrong because, as Kay said, we hardly get something that's close to the average return.
Yeah. And again, when you get right down to it, we're talking about people who are trying to predict the future. Now, fortunately, in our line of work, we do have long-term averages that we can stick with, but predicting what the market's going to do over the next 12 months, impossible.
Yeah, it is. And I think that the upside of making a out-of-the-box call is you get it right and then you open up a fund and you get a whole slew of assets coming into your fund, and then
ring the cash register.
You try and recreate the magic, and over the long term, we know that's really tough to do. And then maybe you write a book about it and go on CNBC every couple of months. So just to share the most recent numbers, I think to that point, we look at how money managers or fund managers compare to the indexes that they benchmark themselves against. This is another measure of basically active versus passive. So over the last year, 23% of money managers have outperformed the S&P 1500. So that is the large cap 500, the mid cap, and the small cap all in there. So 23% outperformed over the last year. So 77% underperformed. Over the last 3 years, 9.9% outperformed the S&P 1500. So 90% underperformed. Over the last 5 years, that number is 85% of fund managers underperformed the S&P 1500. Over the last 10 years, it goes back down to 90% of fund managers underperforming the benchmark that they set themselves against. So basically saying the same thing here as the price targets, a little bit different, but the money managers, they have that career risk. They have to be different than the benchmarks because that is how these funds get assets. What do these numbers say to you guys?
It's very hard to pick stocks.
Yeah, base rates would suggest that you not do so, but I don't think that'll ever stop. The information's out there, the stats have been out there for a long time, and those who want to have more active approach because of anecdote or not being able to accurately measure performance or just not caring and wanting to do it for entertainment purposes, like it's just an element of markets that is probably never going to go away. I just think that for the vast majority of people, unless they're getting some kind of enjoyment out of the activity, they're probably better off indexing and not worrying about trying to beat the market, because you certainly don't need to accomplish your goals. You can get good long-term returns by indexing, keeping costs low, diversifying, just being patient and hanging out. It's boring, but I think that your odds of success are a lot higher than those who want to make it more difficult by trading, selecting stocks, etc.
I think that's something else to be underscored in what Brendan just said, is that when you see these graphs of these long-term price appreciation charts going up and to the right, what a lot of people overlook is a down 20% year, even a down 40% year, they're in there. They're already in there. That's with those returns baked into the cake. And yeah, there's going to be years where the market doesn't do what anybody wants it to do. It's all in there.
Yeah, it is. And I think these numbers that I pulled were compiled by Bob Seawright, who writes the Better Letter newsletter. He does great stuff. He's in our inboxes once a week. He shared some other interesting predictions, non-market related, that were pretty funny towards the end of it. Two of my favorites were that the MLB player Tucupita Marcano was permanently banned from baseball in 2024 for betting on hundreds of games, many in which he participated in. He lost 95% of those bets.
Oh, wow.
And then another one, an expert was on MLB Network before a game between the Marlins and the Yankees, and he was quoted as saying, "Don't take this the wrong way, but we're already on no-hitter alert. Yoshinobu Yamamoto before he throws a single pitch tonight against the Marlins. Miami's Jazz Chisholm took Yamamoto's first pitch of the game deep."
Wow.
Bren, I think like both of you guys said, these guys are paid to go on TV and give opinions. That doesn't mean
it's entertainment. It's their job too, so we can't resent them for doing their job, but we also don't need to listen to the information for anything more than just entertainment or food. I think you can read a lot of these reports that like strategist price targets like are usually contained within about the S&P 500, and you can learn a lot about what expectations are for next year. However, the caveat is the information contained within is going to be the stuff that we already know about, and usually the catalyst for the market moving one way or the other, up or down, in a significant way, is an unknown thing coming to the forefront. Like we talked about people's price targets at the end of 21 headed into 22, and not a lot of people had war in Ukraine and runaway inflation as part of their report, or going back to 2020, like how many 2019 price targets were factoring in pandemic.
None.
Basically, I would say none
Yeah.
in that case, and basically none when we're talking about the 21 for 22 estimates as well. So if those are the things that are going to move the market, then you're not going to see those in the report because nobody knows about them ahead of time.
Right.
It doesn't mean the information's useless. You can read it, be entertained, learn some stuff. I don't know if you change your portfolio as a result of it. That's where you draw the line, I think.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think it's important to have that barrier between reading, understanding the material, the reports, and then making decisions based on that. I think that's where you get into trouble. So that's what we try and stop folks from doing.
Did he really say Yamamoto was on a no-hitter alert? That's
Yeah.
that's insane.
Yeah, I guess.
And
Against the
to be
Marlins,
fair,
and-
Mr. Tucapita was on my fantasy team for a short
he?
while.
I've never heard of him before.
Yeah.
Just
Team
because he
Pittsburgh.
got banned.
He was with the Pirates for a while. He did bounce around, but he was one of those up-and-comer minor league players. I guess he had some inside intel.
Nah. All right. Onward.